Hello, friends. This is a little different departure. It's something I've wanted to do. Like so many of you, I'm a fan of the Old Commentary, which carries such great depth of wisdom to us from ancient times. So, I like to do many things simultaneously. Hopefully the time will allow to undertake these. And I know I'm in the midst of doing astrology for you, and I'm in the midst of working with an adventures in identification, which is very dear to my heart and something that I'm trying to evolve as I speak to you. And now I'd like to speak to you about some sections from the Old Commentary. I'm a pretty careful thinker, so would love to be able to lay everything out in perfect order, rather perfect order, perfect enough. Lay everything out for you with the utmost caution, step by step, in written form. And maybe one day I'll get a chance to do that with these Old Commentary selections. But right now, I think I am not going to do it that way. Rather, I'm going to speak to you about in this case, the Law of Repulse, ray by ray, as the thoughts present themselves to me. Which will mean, if you're hoping for exactitude of thought, then you choose writing. If you're hoping for spontaneity, then one may choose speaking, and that is the method that I'm going to choose now. So naturally, things will not be as organized or as pristine as one might hope, but I hope that I can get across to you and to myself as these thoughts appear to me, some thoughts of interest and value in the interpretation and application of these stanzas from the Law of Repulse, which can be found in Esoteric Psychology 2, somewhere, we're starting on page 166, and for a few pages before that, we can begin to study this law. The Law of Repulse, as you probably know, is the fourth law of the soul. The first three laws, in a way, take their origin from the energy of the higher ego found on the higher mental plane. And I would say, especially upon the second subplane of the higher mental plane, which is the location of the ego and the attention of the solar angel for those who are undertaking the spiritual path. So around the first initiation, and perhaps somewhat a bit before, the ego changes its position, its focus to the second subplane of the mental plane. But the Law of Repulse is a little different. I think it's the first of the laws that involves the spiritual triad, which is really the higher self, not quite as high as the monad as a higher self, but a true ego, which is not limited by the experiences that the individual has had along his evolutionary path. It's not limited by a kind of higher personality tradition, a higher individual tradition, we might say, but it very much inheres within the purpose of our planetary logos, the purpose of Sanat Kumara as he is working out those purposes on the cosmic physical plane, and individuality, because it has been, in a way, its limitations renounced at the fourth initiation, no longer gets in the way of that higher ego's participation in the divine plan for our planet. The law of repulse, then, is the first of the laws of the soul. It's the fourth law, which utilizes the energies of the spiritual triad, which have in them more will, more of the quality of the monad than does the ego per se, although the ego has a great deal of it in a way, coming through the sacrifice petals, the synthesis petals, and the central fire of the monad at its heart. But a still higher version of egoity is found with the spiritual triad, and therefore this particular law requires the building of the antikarana and the utilization of the antikarana in order to be effective. It is very much a first-ray law, as the word repulse will suggest. And yet, in another sense, it is an aspect of the law of love, DK tells us. So it drives away the possibility of attachment to the lower worlds, and yet at a certain point re-embraces that which has been driven away and includes it in soul understanding and soul action and intention. But first comes that sense of loss, I think, which is found in each one of these stanzas, when the consciousness of the individual is still focused pretty much in the three worlds, and the soul influence is not yet what it should be. The attachment to the lower three worlds has to be broken first, and of course this means that the soul is coming to action, that this higher perspective is going to make itself felt, but the jiva, who is experiencing things from the perspective of the lower worlds, doesn't realize, perhaps, that this loss which is forced upon it is the result of the activation of a higher aspect of his nature. And so there's a lot of bitterness, perhaps, in following or engaging in or being subject to this law. And the sense of devastation and the loss of all that had seemed, from a personal perspective, valuable. Now, this in time is realized as a mistake, and when the advice of the soul, which comes through as a word, is followed, then indeed a new perspective is established. The individual begins to realize himself as a soul-infused personality, and even as a higher being on the higher mental plane, and perhaps even as an individual, a true ego which has transcended the higher mental plane. But all of this takes a number of lives. We cannot say how many, but perhaps there's one life in particular in which this sense of loss and devastation is prominent. You know, when you've got a lot of Pluto in your chart and Saturn, and Scorpio is the sign, operative on some level, not to mention Mars and Uranus making their contribution, and of course Vulcan would be there as well with the shattering hammer blow. These are all planets that have aspects of the first ray involved with them. The law of repulse and also the law of integration, the techniques of integration, are operative under the ray of the soul. So when we talk about the direction of ray 1, the word direction itself implies will, and the first ray, which has a type of motion called progress onward and driving forward through space. So when DK describes the quality of the will, it obliterates the actions and reactions of time and space, but substitutes for it an awareness of intensity, of direction. So there is an objective, and there is a path to that objective, and there are not so many byways that one can take when driven by the will. One focuses on that which the will intends. One does the eyes look to neither side, and the ears are closed to all the outer voices, and the hands clenched, the body braced, and mind alert. And this we have learned about from studying the technique of integration under the first ray. Also a technique, even though it's about the integration of the personality, it's a technique which is administered under the ray of the soul. Well, every one of us will have to go through these techniques, these directions, once we find our soul ray and can be pretty sure about it. And sometimes studying the techniques or the directions themselves will give us an idea of what our soul ray may be, because we recognize ourselves passing through this experience. But once we know what the soul ray is, then we really begin to interpret its stanzas carefully in terms of the way we recognize our life being lived, so that we can fulfill the direction given under the particular ray as fully as possible, and get on with the necessary repulsion and the eventual reappropriation under a much higher perspective of those elements which were repulsed. There's nothing inherently bad or evil about what is repulsed. It just has to be spiritualized and subsumed under the soul perspective and the ray perspective of that particular soul. Well, I think the thing to do here, as I say, I wish I could promise you perfection, but it's not going to be perfection. It's going to get us started in our thinking if we have not thought seriously about it. Many of you over the years have taken the esoteric psychology class, the Master of Science in Esotericism with an emphasis in esoteric psychology. It's been a 2-year course, could well be a 3-year course, and many of you are graduates of this particular type of endeavor, during which you have studied the Law of Repulse carefully. Also, if you're a member of the Moria Federation and you're passing through the Quest Universal section of the Moria Federation, you will recognize this as some of the advanced work done in the Advanced Esoteric Psychology course. Really, it takes a lifetime or more to begin to live with these techniques and these directions, and it's impossible to rush them, though perhaps they can be pressed forward and hastened a bit through conscious realization of what they intend to accomplish, and then cooperation with that intention. So this is the direction of Ray 1, and later I will read about the Law of Repulse, and, but I just feel the urge to kind of get into the actual symbolism here. I'll read the whole thing first, and then we can take it phrase by phrase, word by word. The direction of Ray 1. The garden stands revealed. In ordered beauty live its flowers and trees. The murmur of the bees and insects on their winged flight is heard on every side. The air is rich with perfume. The colors riot to the blue of heaven. The wind of God, his breath divine, sweeps through the garden. Low lie the flowers. Bending, the trees are devastated by the wind. Destruction of all beauty is followed by the rain. The sky is black. Ruin is seen, then death. Later another garden, but the time seems far away. Call for a gardener. The gardener, the soul, responds. Call for the rain, the wind, the scorching sun. Call for the gardener. Then let the work go on. Ever destruction, goes before the rule of beauty. Ruin precedes the real. The garden and the gardener must awake. The work proceeds. It's rich, rich, rich in symbolism, and I'm sure you'll be able to think of some of the symbols which I have missed or did not emphasize. The garden is the creative labor of the life of the individual. You give your energy to certain types of growths. You cultivate the appearance and growth of certain types of forms and ideas. So everyone is making of life a kind of garden. The first ray, we realize, is identified very much with the life aspect, with vitality. And when dealing with the garden, we don't have mobility with the plants, but we certainly do have vitality. And at a certain point, the labors of the first gardener, the gardener who is the individual, who is the soul, but expressing itself only as a personality at this time, is seen. It's kind of interesting how first-ray types and also seventh-ray types do seem to like gardens, and they oftentimes build, one might say almost monuments to themselves, in which gardens play an important part. Even formal gardens, such as we would see at Versailles in France. There the seventh ray would have a great deal to do with it. I'm not sure that these gardens are meant to display the glory of God, but they do display the glory of the king, the ego, the one who rules over the great estate. So the results of this kind of creative labor, where one decides what will be in the garden and what not, and if one is attentive, one will weed this garden, or if not, it will be overgrown by weeds. But whatever may be the result, the life force has been directed towards the growth of certain varieties of plants, which stand symbolically for the kinds of patterns that one has in one's life. And the gardener, the individual here, has said yes to some and no to others. So he has chosen according to his individual preference, not necessarily at all according to the divine plan or any higher purpose. And behold, the garden is revealed, it is shown oftentimes as an object of pride. See what I have grown in my life. There is the seventh ray is the more concrete aspect of the first, and it is a ray of beauty. So here it's interesting how in some of the stanzas the first ray type finds that he must adhere to seventh ray methods, to order and rhythm. So we have the 1, 4, and the 7 coming in here, the beauty of the garden under the 4, the order under the 7, and the life aspect of the garden under the 1. So according to the order that is chosen by the individual, who is very much the personality at this time and not the disciple, in ordered beauty live its flowers and trees. The flowers providing the color, the fragrance, and the trees providing the strength and the upliftment. In the old days, interestingly enough, HBB tells us that the members in Atlantis, the members of the Black Lodge, were called the trees. Well, one wonders whether they produced any fruit at all. But anyway, in the standard garden, we have the flowers, bushes, trees, the normal types of plants. There is pollination going on, the murmur of the bees and the insects on their winged flight. is heard on every side. So it is a scene of much activity, fertility. It hosts these minor types of animal life which promote the fertility and the flourishing of the garden. It is a kind of a bucolic scene, and there is this constant presence of the insects. We don't read of any other kind, but we know how important they are to the flourishing of a garden. The flowers and perhaps the trees provide their scent, but one gets the sense that there is not much restraint here, that many things are allowed to live of an individual nature, which perhaps should be curtailed, because everywhere the murmur of the bees and insects is heard, and the air is it oppressively rich with perfume? If we take the hint from the last sentence, we might think so. The air is rich with perfume, and one wonders whether they mix well, or whether they simply express themselves boldly without having been arranged for the most delicate sense. The colors, however, riot, and there is the hint that one thinks here of the fourth formula in Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, and it's called the Sun Upon the Square. And in this Sun Upon the Square, we are dealing with the powers of the Buddhic plane to refine a bold, crude, even garish, clashing colors of the lower planes. They are more the pastel colors, and they work upon these less refined colors, which are not particularly beautiful, nor are they well harmonized. Well, here when I look at this word riot, I think of the clashing of colors. I think that not enough, despite the fact there is order, not enough attention has been given to these expressions in the lower life, which are not well controlled according to a higher principle or a higher pattern. We know that first-rate types, what they don't like is riots, and yet they themselves on their way up are probably the very ones who have rebelled against authority, even if it was a good authority, and created riots. So there's a lack of control here, a lack of harmony, the sense of clashing of qualities, because the first-rate type, I think, likes very much his own qualities, whether or not they are harmonious with each other or congruent with a higher pattern, and he just allows himself to express himself as he will, just as if there are attractions which perfume symbolizes, he allows those various attractions to all flourish, whether or not they harmonize with each other or serve a higher purpose. And he can certainly pollinate and fertilize where he wishes, because that too is unregulated. This is in the first, the way the personality is influenced by the first-ray soul, remembering that there is always an overlay of the higher energies of the soul appropriated by the personality in a personal way. So there will be in every personality of a first-ray soul first-ray indications, which may look very personal indeed, so you may even wonder, is it a first-rate personality? But it is because of the appropriation of soul energy for personal, merely individual purposes by the personality of whatever ray when the soul is on the first ray. The garden stands revealed. It is expressed. Here it is for all to see. There is a type of beauty. It's an ordered beauty. In ordered beauty live its flowers and trees. And this is a beauty decided upon by the individual who still has personal values. He may have good taste, but the higher purpose of it all is not revealed in this particular type of ordered beauty. We're talking about the qualities that the life of the man demonstrates. Now, we do remember how important the garden is to the first-rate type when we think of Master Moria and the book that was written to represent him, one of the books called Leaves of Moria's Garden, well, the leaves of a book, of course, that's one thing, and also that which Master Moria has inspired. But that may have been written by Nicholas Roerich and may not have been dictated by Master Moria, okay, but there is a statement by Master M where he does say, "Burden me still more as I enter the beautiful garden." So, you know, in a way, he is cultivating souls and deciding who to strengthen and where to withhold his vitality. And his garden would be the flourishing of souls of all types who could enact the divine plan in service of the purpose. So the idea of the garden is very much associated with him. Well, here we have this very individual expression, the colors rioting to the blue of heaven. Okay, the clash. It cannot stay that way because it is not really subservient to the divine pattern. It is individually conceived and as such will not fit into the higher plan. Now we have the wind of God. His breath divine sweeps through the garden. Low lie the flowers, bending the trees are devastated by the wind. Destruction of all beauty is followed by the rain. The sky is black, ruin is seen, and then death. Well, we have some interesting names of the first ray Lord. Maybe we can find that. I think they would be in esoteric psychology here. And, okay, let's see. Breath that blasts. That's quite a name. It's on page 64, and one of the names of the first-rate Lord is the breath that blasts. We are also told that the air is God, and God is related to the air. It is perhaps because the very beginning of the true life is found when we reach the cosmic ethers, and it is here on the Buddhic plane that there is in fact a control and a power over what happens in the dense physical body of the planetary logos and then of the solar logos. So the air is life, the air is God. The first ray, life, vitality, air, buddhi, these are associated. Let me just see if I can find that. Oh, there's such amazing names here, you know. But there's one, of course, that's very much associated with air and with breath. Here are all of his names, or, you know, not all of his names, some of his names. The Lord of Death, the Opener of the Door, the Liberator from Form, the Great Abstractor, the Fiery Element producing Shattering, the Crystallizer of the Form, the power that touches and withdraws, the Lord of the Burning Ground. Now look at this one, the Will that breaks into the garden. That fits the Law of Repulse so supremely. The Ravisher of Souls, leaving the spirit open, rather the soul open to the penetration of the spirit. The Finger of God reminds a bit a bit of the whirlwind. The breath that blasts, nothing can withstand it. Some of the most devastating forces that we know in nature are the forces of the wind, the tornado, the whirlwind, the hurricane, which spawns tornadoes, the lightning which annihilates the Most High. So we have here, you know, some of the elements implicated. We have air, we have fire, we have earth and the crystallizer of the form. We don't have the tsunami here. Well, we don't have so much the water element, but there is a power in Neptune and in the tsunami, which is hugely devastating. So I think all the four elements could be used if we chose. Okay, right. So let's see here. So we do see that the wind of God is the whirlwind which the unjust reap. What can be more devastating than a tornado? We've seen so many people lose their lives, and there is this implication in the Bible that one reaps the whirlwind according to karma. So you sometimes wonder why it is that in the United States the whirlwinds seem to drive through the Bible Belt. I've thought that is a peculiar type of justice or retribution, but anyway, we don't understand these things fully. The wind of God, his breath divine. The breath is always associated with the first aspect, and sound can sometimes be, but the voice comes after the breath. You cannot make a sound under the second or third aspects until there is breath. So breath is fire, it is activation, it is vitality, and it is God that is coming through here, the higher principles. It is the energy of the monad, the energy of Shambhala, the energy of the spiritual triad, in contrast with that which has been built up by the personality. Let me just make this a tiny bit longer, because I'm tending to go a little bit too low. All right. The wind of God, his breath divine, sweeps through the garden. There is that progress onward, that sweep forward, that driving forward through space. Sweeps through the garden. Why does it sweep through the garden? Well, no structure that is built by the personality, the jiva within the personality elemental, that the blindness of the jiva, no structure can remain because it is obstructive. And if there's to be an alignment with the jiva within the personality that we want to call the disciple at a certain stage of development, then there has to be the destruction of the old patterns which prevented that alignment. So the garden is all that the man has made in all of its sometimes beauty, sometimes garishness, always a declaration of boldness. Here is my garden, even though there may not be true integration or harmony in it. Those things which the man cultivated as his personal forms of expression, strictly personal forms, are destroyed. Lo lie the flowers, all the things that he brought to fruition. Even the trees which in a way are like pillars and stand for certain strong qualities which he has established are bending. Well, now we remember, nothing is really going to be lost here. Everything will be reappropriated. It's not the qualities that has brought forth the forms which are going to be destroyed, but just the forms temporarily. We experience devastation from the first ray in many ways, sometimes by predatory first ray types, and other times by the first ray within us, which demands the clearing of obstructions to our higher nature, bending the trees, those upright trees, which stood for our strengths and accomplishments, not just the beautiful factors that are emerging in our life. The trees are devastated by the wind. And presumably, they crack, not only bend. We say, that if a tree is to last against a huge wind, it must be very, very supple. But we can imagine that since the first ray rules the quality of crystallization, that these trees are not going to be very supple. They may bend and then they will break, rather than bend and not break. So the wind is the idea, the will and idea of God. It is the pressure of what should be. It is the impression, divine impression, and it does not come in a gentle way, because what has been built up is personal and resistive, so it's experienced as a wind, not just an impression. It has to be swept out of the way. It's coming from the cosmic ethers, and all these cosmic ethers are in a way, all of them are in a way planes of air. Of course, here we have on the logoic plane fire, and then we have fire, and there's different ways to do it. The intuitional plane can be considered a plane of air, the spiritual plane of water, and fire, earth, air, water. So the divine plane is fire, and we're left with the interesting idea that the monadic plane may be considered earth, but from another perspective, the Buddhic plane may be considered the plane of earth. All of them are considered planes of air, and when we isolate the intuitional or Buddhic plane, generally, it's considered to be air. But in a way, God is air, and God is the higher ethers, the cosmic ethers, which contain the true principles of the planetary logos and solar logos. And for that reason, we consider the power of God as air, whereas that which lies below can be considered as water, or it can be considered as earth, generally not fire per se, although there are fiery divisions to it. The wind of God, his breath divine, because we do want to be vitalized by the divine breath, sweeps through the garden. The divine breath breathes upon us. Breathe on me, breath of God. Well, in the hymn, it's it's considered rather gentle type of breath. Here it's a howling storm. And even our good, upright qualities are devastated by the wind temporarily. Destruction of all beauty is followed by the rain. Destruction of all personal beauty, of all that was considered beautiful by the unenlightened personality. Now, when we read, we're going to read a little bit about the law of repulse for the fourth ray, and we will see that that which the personality considered beautiful, expressed in terms of sound, is ugliness when compared with the great chord of God. So bending the trees are devastated by the wind. Destruction of all personal beauty is followed by the rain, and the rain here is grief. It's not necessarily the nourishing rain. It just dissolves everything finally, and it all runs away. The sky is black. There's no more hope. There's no more promise for the future. You sometimes look to the blue sky and you feel optimism about what may come, but here the sky is black, and it does not promise relief from this destruction. Ruin is seen. All that the man has built of a personal nature is swept aside, and probably pretty much because of the way he has used the first ray. There's retribution here. God may be behind the retribution, but sometimes the retribution can come in the form of social movements and revolutionaries and so forth, who may be carrying out the will of God in a certain sense, but they go into the great manor, they vandalize it, they destroy it, they wreak havoc in the garden, they uproot everything, they make ugliness where there was beauty, and all of that may be retribution for first ray misapplication of energy in previous times. Let's just say the dissolving power of the rain, the pummeling power of the rain, the grief of the rain is found, and then the sky is black. No promise, no hope, Everywhere ruin is seen, the ruin of all the highest personal objectives, and then the death. It may be the death of the man's personality, the death of all the dreams he had, the death of his ambitious plans. He is destroyed pretty much by the power that he used earlier in order to acquire what he needed to build in what he considered to be beauty while others suffered. You think about the French kings and you think about the gorgeous surroundings in which they lived, built upon the blood and labor and taxes of the disadvantaged public. And there came retribution, of course. Well, later. How much later? How much later? We're looking here at future incarnations. What does the man have to learn? He has to learn sensitivity, inclusiveness, love, suffering with, empathy, all that. He's going to keep on expressing himself, but finally there will come, he will have been able to develop the ability to build a different kind of garden, or at least the beginnings of it. Later, another garden, another form of self-expression in which various types of patterns are emerging and coming to fruition, a variety of growing things, of growing qualities are coming to fruition, but it's a long time. It's a long time from the earlier one. And one day we'll be able to study the sequence of lives and see how often, on the average, this second garden appears. Call for a gardener. We're not being too specific now. Who's going to take care of this garden now? Earlier, it's pretty clear that the man took care of it himself, the individual, or he had his underlings do so. But it was according to his own whim, his design, his personal preferences. Now call for a gardener. It's not going to be the man in the same way. Call for a gardener. Now specific, the gardener, the one who really should be gardening, the one who is really tending the personality expression symbolized by the gardener of the soul responds. So perhaps who's calling for the gardener? Well, maybe the man has lost his supreme confidence in himself as a personality and says, who spiritually will help me with this? How shall I know what forms of life I will allow to flourish, what patterns will flourish, what things shall be kept out, what the design shall be? He calls on some inward force to assist, and the gardener, the soul, the true gardener, who will make a garden of real beauty because it will reflect divinity, responds. Now we have the same kind of elements involved here, especially we have water, air, and fire, to work within the earth. Call for the rain. It's not the destructive rain and the grief, it's the nourishing rain. Call for the wind. It's not a tornado. It's not a hurricane. It's not the breath that blasts sweeping through the garden. It is more measured, because the soul will apply a measured response to the invocation of the personality. And the scorching sun. Well, the word scorching sounds like a lot of heat is to be applied, but I suspect that we have some solar fire coming in here, and not just fire by friction. We could have said the warming sun, but perhaps the scorching sun, an intense application of solar fire, will help rid the garden of those forms of life which are not needed for a true soul garden. Call for the rain, the wind, the scorching sun, the three higher elements working in the earth. Call for the gardener. Now it's become quite specific for the one who is invoking or calling, who is the somewhat enlightened now individual who realizes his mistakes from the past He knows that the soul is indeed the gardener. At first it's a gardener. Can someone help me? Now it is the gardener. Then once the interplay between soul and personality really begins, or let's call it the interplay between soul and disciple, the work can go on. And that work is, of course, cultivation of the garden, with the soul as the true gardener, but advising the man who also helps with the gardening, but in a new way, not just according to personal preference and what he thinks is beautiful or he thinks is attractive. There has been a chastening, a harmonizing, an understanding of the truer beauty that comes from the higher realms. Then the work really can go on, and it's cooperative work between the soul, the gardener, and his representative, who is the man who is expressing in the three worlds. And then principles are enunciated. Ever destruction goes before the rule of beauty. There was some beauty in the first garden, but it was of a personal nature and not really Buddhic beauty coming from the realm of intuition and from the first, in a way, counting from from below upwards, the first of the lower planes. Ever destruction goes before the rule of beauty. The Buddhic plane is in a way the ruler of all the lower planes, and is also the plane of beauty. And we have to go through a lot of suffering before the soul really, with its Buddhic principle, begins to infuse the personality. And this, of course, operates even for the first ray soul. For all ray souls, the soul is Buddhi. The soul is beauty. The soul is love and wisdom, whatever the ray type may be. And we just have to become detached from all of the magnetisms in the three worlds which captivated our attention. And there's no way to do this unless some of the higher forces are applied. The lower forces themselves are elemental, and they will not detach themselves from those preoccupations, those apprehensions, those graspings. They will not. But with the intervention in time and at the right time of a higher divine or spiritual energy, that detachment will come. And we consider that detachment to be a destruction. It certainly is in the eyes of even the intelligent personality. Many people have built kingdoms of what they considered to be great beauty, and maybe there was great beauty of a kind, only to witness the destruction as an enforced detachment, engineered, impelled from above, was forced upon them. So this is a principle, and it's something that operates all through the law of repulse. Ever destruction goes before the rule of true beauty, not just personal beauty, but the beauty that comes from the higher ethers, four of them, from the Buddhic plane, the beauty of the archetypes, which are only found on the cosmic ethers. That's the true beauty, because it was ideated or conceived in the mind of God, and not in the mind of a lesser attenuated extension of God, such as we are. Ruin precedes the real. This is a general statement as well. So we have tried to create beauty in the realm of Maya, glamour, and illusion. There is some allure, there is some beauty. It's a reflection, I guess. It's a reflection of what occurs below. Let's see here. Yeah, it's a reflection, and it's not the real beauty. The real occurs on the cosmic ethers. So if the cosmic ethers and their patterns are ever to make themselves present, that to which we are attached below must lie in ruins. Otherwise, we will just continue attached to it, and we will never get to experience the real. The garden, a form of expression of the man, and the gardener, the soul, who is really trying now to be the white magician and work its forms through into that type of expression, must awake. This is a first ray word. And they must awaken to each other, I would say. There must be that kind of white magical interplay which goes on with the soul, the gardener, and the fully awakened disciple who is aware fully of the soul and is thus able to create a garden or a piece of magical demonstration or creation which is aligned with the soul purpose. The thrill of the first ray must come through both of them, and the garden must show the life of the soul, and the gardener who is the soul must infuse the secondary gardener, or the authority who's managing the garden, that is the lower ego, must infuse that lower ego with its own vision, its own awakened vision. In this case, it's almost as if the man as gardener, responsive to the soul as gardener, must awaken, and that the garden shall be filled with soul vitality, and not just elemental vitality, but a vitality which really comes from the higher worlds. And then, indeed, the work proceeds. The work proceeds, it goes on steadily forward, and of course we are not yet at the point with the law of repulse where the individual has definitely found his way into full illumination. We are still here working towards that third initiation, towards the illumination. We have recovered. We are now reoriented. The wheel is reversed. Perhaps we have made our definite decision between the second and third initiation that we will always follow the will of the soul and will not be tempted to seek a type of life expression which is only for ourselves as lower individuals. Let's just say we're moving towards illumination here. The work is proceeding. The life aspect is starting to come in. The soul's vitality is coming in. The garden will be beautiful, but beautiful in a different way. Beautiful in a way that is spiritual, which is divine, which is harmonious with the plan's intent, not just an isolated enclave of the beauty born of personal preference, which oftentimes is parasitical upon the larger environment. In other words, creating one's own preserve and personal beauty just for one's own pleasure, regardless of the condition of the environment. No, but something which really feeds, something that really supports, stands as an object of beauty to all. In other words, my personal expression now, let us say, is fully infused by the soul, and my garden is of great assistance to all, rather than just a personal preserve which I hide away for the nobility or the elite, for my friends and all, that kind of thing, as we perhaps saw demonstrated in various types of royalty. Now, remember how the Tibetan told the disciple CDP, rays were 26566, how he told her, build a garden on the mental plane, make it very clear, put love into it, use clear visualizing techniques. It will be a real thing, and it will benefit many. Many will repair to this garden, will come to this garden, and as a result, they will be restored. So it will be a place of refuge, revitalization, reanimation for those, whether alive or dead, who will come to your garden and gain some improvement in their life because of being in your garden, associated with your garden. And thus it is here with the garden, which is created now by the disciple who is increasingly soul-infused, who trusts the higher gardener to work through him, who uses the elements in the right way, in a moderate way, subduing all of that riot and that excess. Riot and excess were the result of the earlier attempts at creating a garden. But this is all in proportion. The glamour is over, the illusion is over, the maya, the chaos, in a way, the hum of the bees and the insects on their winged flight, that was a bit of the maya going on there. The colors, which were excessive, a bit of the glamour going on there, the perfume, maybe that was astral in nature. You could see things were not in proportion. They were too much. They were excessive. Now things are right. According to the plan, the work proceeds, and the reoriented individual is moving on towards a higher objective. Okay, well, those are some thoughts about this. If you are a first-ray soul, then, you've got to think it through in your own way. How does it apply to you? Maybe even, as a first-ray personality, you could somewhat do that. Or if you're simply interested in going deeper into psychology and figuring out how a first-ray soul would approach this change of life, this necessary destruction and reorientation and rebuilding, then think on these things and try to find the specific instances and how they work in people's lives. Okay, well, I think now, we can do the great invocation. We're just about at the hour point, and we can do that and then go on to Ray 2. It's a longer stanza. Some of these are longer stanzas. This one's short, but it's packed. And of course, you may, think of things that I missed, and, the symbolism may speak to you in yet a different way. So this is the great invocation, ending this first discussion on the direction of Ray 1, Law of Repulse. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Okay, friends. We will then go on to the second law of repulse, the direction of Ray 2, in a way the first, do we call the main figure in the first one the gardener? It's easy to call the second ray type the scholar, the third ray the weaver, the fourth ray the mixer, the fifth ray the worker, the sixth ray the frenzied follower, and the seventh ray the magician. What should we call him or her upon the first ray? We can decide that. Okay, we will pause and then we will go on. Okay. Okay, friends, hi. Now we are ready to go on to a Law of Repulse stanza, which I think affects so many of us, the direction of ray 2, second ray. Naturally, in DK's groups, there would be the majority of second ray souls, and I suppose some second ray monads. And this second ray formula will be of broad usefulness, although we will discover that since there are 3 different types of second ray souls, this particular approach tends to relate, I think, more to the third type of second ray soul, the one who is the occultist, the one who follows the line of meticulous entirety and of detailed unity, and who is interested in the divine pattern particularly. Not so much the pure love type of second ray soul, and to an extent like some of those upon the wisdom line, but only, I think, to an extent. So let me then read this, which I think is most excuse me, interesting. And we are dealing with what I would call Old Commentary Perspectives. I guess that's what I'll call this session of programs, Old Commentary Perspectives. I almost called them Old Commentary Commentaries, but okay. I think Perspectives is a little better. So here we go with the second ray of love wisdom. The scholar knows the truth. All is revealed to him, surrounded by his books and sheltered in the world of thought. He burrows like a mole and finds his way into the darkness. He arrives at knowledge of the world of natural things. His eye is closed. His eyes are open wide. He dwells within his world in deep content. Detail on detail enter into the content of his world of thought. He stores the nuggets of the knowledge of the world as a squirrel stores its nuts. The storehouse now is adequately full. Sudden a spade descends, for the thinker tends the garden of his thought, and thus destroys the passages of mind. Ruin arrives, destroying fast the storehouse of the mind, the safe security, the darkness and the warmth of a satisfied inquiry. All is removed. The light of summer enters in, and the darkened crannies of the mind see light. Naught is left but light, and that cannot be used. The eyes are blinded, and the one eye seeth not as yet. Slowly the eye of wisdom must be opened. Slowly the love of that which is the true, the beautiful, and the good must enter the dark passages of worldly thought. Slowly the torch of light, the fire of right, must burn the garnered treasures of the past, yet show their basic usefulness. The 7 ways of light must wean away the attention of the scholar from all that has been found and stored and used. This he repulses, and finds his way into that hall of wisdom which is built upon a hill, and not deep underground. Only the opened eye can find this way. Well, I think we can see there's quite a bit more to stanza number 2 than there is to stanza number 1. The first ray is in many ways the ray of brevity. So let us begin analyzing, interpreting this particular stanza, which I think has quite a bit of relevance to the students of Master DK, who is, I think, himself, or was at least long ago, in a position to benefit from this particular stanza. The scholar knows the truth. One who seeks to gather all the relevant material on any particular subject and to know his subject thoroughly. The scholar, one who is of the schools, one who is given to deep study. We know how DK describes the second ray in terms of its study, the possibility of too much study without taking action. And he also describes the second ray as one who is ever bent on pure truth and will not rest until higher and higher attainments of the truth are his. Now, this all is done from the personality perspective. The jiva at this time is manifesting as a personality, and what we call the truth is certainly not the truth in a higher sense. It's the truth as truth is interpreted in the lower 3 worlds. It is very much, I think, a mental truth without the deeper feeling or intuitive component. He is a knower of that which can be known by the mind in the lower 3 worlds, and he studies his subject laboriously. Again, it says all is revealed to him, but is it really all, or does he think it is all? It is all, perhaps, on a particular subject. In this way, he tends to share certain approaches with the 5th ray type, who becomes an expert in a particular field, but then tends to bring that field into more mechanical, manual application, which is not necessarily the case with the 2nd ray type, who has perhaps a more hands-off approach. It's sufficient for the 2nd ray type simply to know, and the area of activity that he finds himself in, perhaps, unless other rays contraindicate, are the fields of psychology and the area of the emotions and the use of the subtle bodies to work in the world, rather than as physically as the 5th ray type will work. So much is revealed to him, but in his own view, all is revealed to him, all about the subject that he is given to study. Notice the world is shut out here. He's surrounded by his books. This was written in the days, of course, when books were the great repository of knowledge. They still are, of course, in the great libraries of the world, but now we have the internet, and he could be, surrounded by many screens, each of which could give him access to more knowledge than he could possibly realize from the books, although so much is not translated yet into internet availability. But we get the idea. The world per se, the actuality of the world, the harshness of the world, the direct sensory involvement with the world is shut out by all of the books that he has read and studied, and which have given him his conception of the world, oftentimes not the result of direct experience, but the result of what others have said about direct experience, and this for him is good enough. So this is his environment. He's in the library, and first-hand contact with life may not be sought. Surrounded by his books and sheltered in the world of thought, he is spared the harsh reality of physical contact. He is in some ways protected by his thoughts. His thoughts serve as mediators between him and actual experience. Now, that's not to say that many first-rate, second-rate types do not seek direct experience, but there is a possibility to be, so to speak, a schoolman, as it were, and to gain all knowledge from books and from what others have said about life. Those upon the second and third ray together show this tendency, especially if the sixth ray is also present. And it was against this type of approach that Master R, when he appeared as Francis Bacon, it was against this approach that he leveled his criticism and said, well, really, how do you know that these things that you read and think about are really true? You have not experimented with the real world. So Francis Bacon rang the bell which called the wits together, and these were people of a more practical bent who began actually to experiment with the world and find out whether what was said in the books was true or not true, and so often they discovered it was not true, and that experiment revealed a different type of provable and reprovable truth. But anyway, our scholar here is surrounded by his books, hopefully good ones, and he is sheltered, buffered, protected by his own thoughts about reality, and is not coming into direct contact, perhaps, with the actual experience of that about which he seems to know. He burrows like a mole, and moles, we know, are blind. So there's an element of blindness here, and he's going deeper and deeper into matter itself and not into the realm of truth. He's going into the earth, and his knowledge is of an earthly kind at this stage of his development. And he finds his way not into the light, although he may consider it to be a type of light, but into what, from the perspective of the higher illumined planes, would be called darkness. Now, he is arriving at knowledge indeed, but it's knowledge of the three lower planes, especially the 18 lower subplanes. And these planes are unprincipled, and from the perspective of the higher mind, are considered planes of darkness. They are certainly of dim light. They are not of the brilliant, revelatory light of the cosmic ethers. So he's burrowing into the world that is shaped by the elementals, and he's learning elemental knowledge in a way, and indeed knowledge of the elements. These are, this is knowledge of the natural world. He learns of natural things, which means that that which he considers knowable is for the most part on the 18 lower subplanes. And there's a form of light on these subplanes, but it is still in what the Tibetan has called the hall of ignorance. You can have some very concretely intelligent people working in the hall of ignorance, but they are working on a level which does not yet appreciate that there is a pair of opposites, a higher self and a lower self, They don't know anything of the higher pairs of opposites, which we call the soul, and instead they work strictly in the realm of personality with that which is revealed mostly to the five senses of the personality, and therefore their knowledge is mostly of a strictly worldly kind. There can be some knowledge of the astral plane which is derived as a person begins to ascend in the pursuit of knowledge, and some knowledge of the mental plane, of course, but it's still within the world of Hall of Ignorance, because in the Hall of Learning, one is learning that the soul exists and that it has a special type of knowledge all of its own, and subjectivity begins to make its impression upon consciousness. Because he's working in the Hall of Ignorance, his eye is closed, and by that we are talking about his unitive or synthetic factor. It is the third eye, and interestingly enough, this eye begins to awaken not just at the third initiation, but from the time the first initiation is taken, there is a slow and gradual opening of the third eye. But that would be in the Hall of Wisdom, that eye would begin to awaken around the time of the first initiation and following until by the third initiation it becomes quite usable. So this particular eye, which would give him deep understanding of that which he studies, and which would begin to reveal to him its spiritual source, he could begin to see with some spiritual discernment. He could see the unitive group nature of things. He could see all those things. That particular eye is closed. The ethers in the brain, in the etheric brain around the pineal gland, are not sufficiently stimulated. The pineal gland is not yet re-stimulated. Maybe it was very stimulated in the days of early man. This man still sees under the spell of duality. In the time-space worlds, his intelligence is operating, and not in the unitive world of the soul. So his eyes are open wide, tells us that he is very observant, because after all, he is a scholar, and he wants to know all he can about everything he sees, especially in the world of the senses, and to an extent in the emotional and mental worlds. So his eyes are perhaps open wider than the eyes of many people, but he is not sufficiently keen to begin to understand the meaning of things. As the third eye begins to open, even though at the period of the first initiation, meaning from the world of the soul begins to dawn. But here we are dealing more with facts and nuggets of knowledge of the natural world, the interactions of which he understands, I think, quite well, better than most. But until the eye which is closed is opened, he will still be working underground as a mole in the Hall of Ignorance. And of course, he's happy about it. He dwells within his world in deep content. His world is the world of the sort of middle consciousness. It's not a world in great depth, delving into the unconsciousness, which for all intents and purposes have to do with the astral plane and even mental phenomena. He is not dealing with spiritual matters. It's a very limited world which he considers to be the object of his dedicated perception. And as he is accumulating more and more knowledge in this world, we will play upon the word content and content. He dwells within his world in deep content because his content, the content of his mind, is rapidly filling, and the more he accumulates, this is a second-rate tendency, working with the disease I call accumulitis, the more he gathers, the greater the content of his mind, the greater his content. The content is deep because he does not suspect that there may be outside of his world of perception vast worlds of depth and height. If he began to sense that, he would develop the spiritual inferiority complex, which is so common to those upon the second ray. Once they begin to wake up, they begin to realize there's so much more, so much vastly more than they had considered, that their content looks very small indeed. And with it, their content goes, and they develop a state of very aggravated divine discontent in which they seek to search for ever greater knowledge of a truer kind. The scholar knows the truth. All is revealed to him. Surrounded by his books and sheltered in the world of thought, he burrows like a mole and finds his way into the darkness. He arrives at knowledge of the world of natural things. His eye is closed. His eyes are open wide. He dwells within his world in deep content. Now we will go on. Detail on detail enter into the content of his world of thought. This is called the ray of detailed unity. There was one person with a second ray mind. He was one of three, I think. His rays were 2, 1, 2, 1, 3. He had a second ray mind, and so did someone else. And this particular person was warned about overemphasis upon detail. One might wonder also whether he had, some strong Mercury there, Virgo, probably Gemini, something of that nature. I'm not sure we have his horoscope. Detail on detail enter into the content of his world of thought. So it's not really seeing the big picture yet, necessarily. It's interested in all the little particulars, collecting them together so that they can make a pattern. One day he wants to see the pattern, since his second ray is called also the ray of the divine pattern. So his content is constantly increasing, and he's always interested in one more thing. And you know how it is when you study Master DK's books. There's so many amazing details. I personally am given to this, and I have something called AAB extracts, which gets bigger and bigger and bigger with all of these, the content. But of course, I don't consider this to be worldly knowledge. I consider this to be knowledge related to the higher worlds, although it is, nuggetry. Let's call it nuggetry. A friend of mine and I, when we used to work at the Lucis Trust, we used to play this game called nuggetry. And we'd come in every morning and what's some new nugget, some new nugget from the teaching that could perhaps fill in more of the divine pattern. So he is accumulating in this way, accumulating detail after detail. He may not yet see the pattern, but the pattern will emerge, and certainly the sense of these luminous nuggets exist. But in this particular case, the details are from the world of natural things, from the lower 18 subplanes, and especially from the lowest 3 subplanes, the planes of apparent to solid, liquid, and gas. So he's storing them up, maybe the squirrel is a second ray animal. He's storing the nuggets of the knowledge, not of heaven, but of the world. He accumulates them. He keeps them in storehouse, in his memory, in journals, in whatever repositories he can find, so he can always access them when he wants to. And that's, exactly the purpose, I hope on a higher turn of the spiral, of the AAB extracts that I have gathered, and which I'm happy to share with anybody. It just keeps growing, and you can make many compilations out of these AAB extracts. And, there's always these different points of view from each one of these extracts. So these are the nuggets, which eventually become radiatory and begin to touch all the other nuggets. And pretty soon you have a jigsaw puzzle, which reveals a divine pattern in the Mosaic world. The little pieces in the mosaic are like nuggets. You put them all together and they reveal a picture which is a reflection of a seamless picture in the world of archetypes. At least that's how I conceive it. So he stores these nuggets of the knowledge of the world as a squirrel stores its nuts. I don't think we can really say that the higher mental plane is part of this nuggetry, part of this storage. It's all having to do with the 18 lower subplanes under the moon. It's sublunar, as they say, under the moon. It's the elemental worlds. And not even that much is known about the astral and mental worlds. You have someone like Leadbeater or Annie Besant come along. They are very detailed in their knowledge of the astral and mental worlds, but the average person, no, and the average scholar, no, not even of the etheric plane. No, it has more to do with the lower three subplanes, although one day they could, when they start to wake up spiritually, begin to store the knowledge, the nuggets of the knowledge of the subtle worlds. They could do that too, but it would still be, not necessarily spiritual. It will still be in the dense physical body of the planetary logos. Okay, we've reached that point in evolution when something can be done. We've taken the cumulitis as far as it can go. The storehouse, whether in memory or in journals or in files or whatever, or in books written, etc., is now adequately full. Adequate to what? Adequate to the next stage of evolution, where something destructive happens, as it always must, because ruin precedes the real. Sudden, a spade descends. A spade is a gardening tool, and the soul is the gardener. Interesting how the image of the garden makes its way over into this second direction of repulse. Suddenly, at a time when the scholar doesn't expect it and is feeling quite content with all he has gathered, as if there's no more to know. You know how it was at the end of the 19th century. I think it was thought that everything that could be learned about physics had really been learned. Newton had been followed very carefully, and many laws were formulated, and much was known about the behavior of substances in the dense physical worlds. And then suddenly we begin to get intrusions from the etheric world. We begin to understand radioactivity. Everything changed. So all that contentment was replaced by disconcertion and realization that we knew practically nothing, and at the same time, excitement that so much more could be known. So sudden a spade descends, a gardening tool, for the thinker, the soul, tends the garden of his thought. Ultimately, it is the soul that must work as the thinker through the disciple, or through the awakening one, and thus destroys the passages of mind, the separated passages of mind, where things are not adequately linked together. We can follow this line of thought and this line of reasoning and that line of reasoning, but they don't all connect in some sort of effulgence, which is reflective of an eventual state of omniscience. We get the idea of passages and crannies and narrow lines of transmission, which do not really fully connect with each other. In other words, Mercury has not fully done its work. And when it does, we will have the fairly completed intuition on the intuitive level. So sudden a spade descends, meaning we want to turn over the soil. We want to get the life moving through the soil. We want the brain to be planted with thoughts from above, or ideas from above, in a new way. So the spade is necessary to destroy the particular pattern that we have in our conscious thought. The passages of mind and all the habitual lines of thinking that we could not deviate from are destroyed. Ruin arrives. Well, ruin of one's previously coveted or enjoyed mental world. Ruin of the sense that all has been known, or a great deal has been known. When the spade descends, one begins to sense that practically nothing is known. And so the ordinary structures of thought, which have been non-spiritual and upon which the man dwelt with deep content, these structures are destroyed. And what are the new laws and what are the new types of ideas that could come in? Destroying fast the storehouse of the mind. Well, one begins to think that there's so much more that one no longer relies upon that storehouse because it begins to seem like nothing. Now, of course, it is a garnered treasure, and all of these facts that have been accumulated from the lower worlds are useful eventually. But at first, they seem minimal. They seem like nothing. What was it that, I will surely misquote it, but the idea that when St. Thomas Aquinas really began to awaken, realizing he was a great scholar, a great theorist, and a great philosopher, and he wrote impressively on the church and the mind and the doctrines. He was the acme of theologians. He said, "All that I've written is as straw compared with the revelations that I am now having." And these were revelations more, I think, of love or of the Christ energy and so forth. As impressive, as monumental, as voluminous as his writings had been, they were all to him like straw, and that is equivalent to destroying the passages of mind. We used to walk within the mind in a particular passage, and we turn to the right and walk in another narrow passage, and all of this labyrinthian network of separate passages that indicated the way we reasoned and thought in very narrow, limited channels, all destroyed. Ruin arrives, destroying fast the storehouse of the mind, because there's just so much more. And look at this, the safe security. See, because we realize the second ray is the sensitive type, and essentially is so sensitive, it wants to be sheltered in the world of thought. Of course, there is security in thinking you know everything about everything, or at least a great deal. You can manage the world, it doesn't have to intrude upon you with this harsh, cold reality. You know what to expect. So there's this sense of being protected when one knows a great deal and enjoys the content of what one has accumulated. You accumulate content. It's all around you. It's like the great one who builds himself an ark, the blessed one. Then he gets lost in the ark. He can't get out. Only his voice can get out, and he can't see. It's the same second-ray principle of the accumulating, gathering in more than you can manage until you lose yourself through all of these accumulations, through all of this including of more and more and more. There's some people who won't throw anything away. You know how it gets. I know people that have gone to help people who are in this condition. They have accumulated so much they cannot manage. And in their houses, there are these tiny, little, narrow pathways between the junk that has been accumulated and will not be thrown out, because somehow there is safety and security in all of this sheltering accumulation. So there has been a warding off of the usual second ray vulnerability through accumulitis. The safe security, nothing can touch me, nothing can harm me, because I am a knower. The safe security, the darkness, and the warmth, it's comforting. And of course it's darkness because it's you're protected from the blinding light, which is most disconcerting. I mean, when St. Paul was hit by the blinding light, probably some Vulcan-Venus combination, they say he fell off his horse, he was blinded for 3 days. Most disconcerting, what is this light compared with what I thought was light before. It's been nothing but darkness. And the warmth, it's not like taking a cold shower, is it? You get into a hot tub or something, or not even too hot a tub, just something about body temperature. There's no shock to the system. Everything seems manageable. There's no intrusion. You don't have to adapt suddenly to conditions which are either too hot or too cold. It's a very agreeable environment that's created by all this study. The darkness and the warmth of a satisfied inquiry. What was Master Mori saying? Basically, like something like this, that contentment is the cemetery of the spirit. Satisfaction is the cemetery of the spirit, because the striving ceases. Everything is agreeable. And you know all there is to know, or you know quite enough, and there's no need to know too much more. Everything's fine. But all that world is destroyed. All this warmth, this darkness, the sense of satisfaction, the many, many things that you cherished, it's all removed. Certainly removed from consciousness, because it seems like nothing. Something is now intruding, and it seems perhaps so much greater, certainly very threatening. All is removed as one begins to wake up to a larger sphere from which knowledge can be gathered. The second ray continues the desire to gather knowledge, of course, but it's going to be knowledge of a different kind, and instead of a satisfied inquiry, there's constant dissatisfaction, constant divine discontent. If I can find that thing, it's over here in Esoteric Psychology 1. And around page 203, somewhere in there, he says, here it is. The student on this ray, second ray, is ever unsatisfied with his highest attainments. No matter how great his knowledge, his mind is still fixed on the unknown, the beyond, and on the heights as yet unscaled. Well, you know it wasn't always that way. After the experience we're talking about here of repulse, then it's gradually, slowly, you can become that way, because, the desire to accumulate, to gather, to include the whole, to bring it all together in all its parts and pieces still continues. But now the sphere has gotten immensely larger because of the descending of the spade. And now all the comfortable warmth of a satisfied inquiry is gone forever, and in its place the vast universe filled with the possibility of endless knowledge, spheres within spheres within spheres. And so discontent is the rule. All is removed. The light of summer enters in, not the light of the hall of ignorance, which is kind of a false and reflected light, but the light of true illumination, where the sun of knowledge, the soul, is casting its beams into the consciousness of the individual. That is the light of summer. It's soul light, which is vastly more inclusive than the light that is sometimes carried on the top of the head, and by which small light the weaver weaves. I'm borrowing here from the third ray law of repulse, but there is, in the case of a mystic, a little light upon the head, which has to serve as illumination. And by that, I think he just means the light of the concrete mind, which is the smallest reflection of the light of the soul. The light of summer of the soul enters in, and the darkened crannies. Now, when you think of a cranny, you just think of a real narrow, dirty passageway that you can hardly crawl through, and it's filled with debris, and it's not, it's not very clean at all, and it's crooked, it's not straight, and there's many twists and turns, and dirt gets caught in the crevices, and there's nothing pure about it. And the consciousness had been just filled with darkened crannies along which the reasoner made his way, but which really were not revelatory at all. And there were just so many areas of ignorance even with all this reasoning process. And suddenly all the dirt and the filth and the obstructions in the cracks of the crannies are revealed for what they are. Of course, the crannies are being destroyed, aren't they? Because these are the passages of mind. The crannies are being destroyed, and in the place of the crannies is some liberated form of knowing, which is very uncommon to the man at this point. He's never experienced it before. The light of the soul, the summer enters in, and the darkened crannies of the mind see light. The ignorance sees light. The higher of the pairs of opposites is now shining. We're at least entering into the hall of learning and maybe going beyond. And before long, and after a while, nothing is left but light, and that cannot be used. The whole question about how the second ray shall apply this verging upon omniscience that comes to it is a big question. It's almost like the intuition begins to reveal one thing after another, all the connections. Mercury is beginning to make so many connections that any thought of separate little crannies moving along in the consciousness, in the mind, is dispelled. Such a thought is dispelled. Such a condition is dispelled. And we have a lighted sphere now in the mind. We begin to have the mind which is held steady in the light, but not yet. The light is descending, but the third eye is not really open, and we don't necessarily realize the source of all of this additional light. All we know is that the old light is no good. It's minimal, it's fading out, and we are blinded by the acquisition of so much light. We don't know how to handle it. That cannot be used. It is not formulated yet, so it can be used in the world. We're just experiencing the shock of revelation, one thing after another of a higher sort, and we haven't organized it. The eyes are blinded, meaning the world of objectivity and of duality is no longer interesting. The eyes are no longer focused in that world. What is the use of acquisitions coming from that particular natural world when there's so much more to learn? But the one eye seeth not as yet and cannot make sense of all the illumination that is pouring in. So things are out of control, and they are not yet controlled by the one eye which comes, which awakens when we have the truly soul-infused individual. We just know that there's a lot more in the world than we knew before. It's endless. We can't handle it. And all that we thought was so interesting is relegated to the area of non-interest because it seems so small, so puny, with respect to the greater type of revelation now revealed as possible. Very uncomfortable situation, one that hopefully we have somewhat left behind because although we may study what's going on in the world, we're not exclusively interested in the knowledge of the natural world. We're not blindly burrowing into all the knowledge that can be had about strictly natural things, ignoring their spiritual roots. Okay, the eyes are blinded, and the one eye seeth not as yet. We have to go through the process, which is a process beginning as we enter the Hall of Wisdom at the first initiation or thereabouts, where the eye of wisdom will be opened. At least we have now become teachable. We are no longer so smug, so satisfied with what we know, so caught in the illusory thought form that the area we've been studying is the only area that can be studied. The vastness of the spheres begin to reveal themselves, and we are appalled before our own ignorance. Slowly, and it is slowly because it takes place really over 3 initiations and beyond, the eye of wisdom must be opened. It's an eye which begins to see more general principles. It has spiritual discernment. It understands the group unitive nature of all things. It begins to receive impression from higher sources, spiritual telepathy. The eye of wisdom keeps on opening as all the higher cities begin to make themselves available. It moves beyond even the highest level of the concrete mind. Wisdom is of the higher mental plane and beyond, and the Shiva eye, the blue eye, the one eye, the eye of wisdom, is having to do with registering those types of impressions and knowledges. Slowly the eye of wisdom must be opened. Slowly the love of that which is the true, the beautiful, and good. Notice the order here. It goes from ray 3 to ray 2 to ray 1. It doesn't say good, beautiful, and true, because it's almost as if we have to start with what is true and then work our way into the beautiful, the divine pattern, and the good, which is the that which the archetypes reveal. Slowly the love, so we're recathecting, we're reorienting our magnetism, our desire toward another world. We are looking into the world of the soul. The true, the good, the beautiful, and the good does not occur except by reflection in these lower worlds. The source of it all is the soul, and not even really the soul. The source is the spiritual triad and the monad, and actually Sanat Kumara, God within us. So we are lifting our eyes. We are not blindly burrowing like moles in the world of strict subject-object objectivity. We are lifting our eyes towards higher values, and we are changing our loves. We used to love our subjects in the lower worlds, and all those things we were studying, we might be, I don't know, knowing everything we can about the dolls that had been produced in a particular country during a particular era. It gets that specific. We might be collecting model cars and know everything about them. We might know about toy soldiers, which were created between the year 1880 and 1890, and know everything about it and the people who created it and why they created it and all the rest. That kind of specific concrete knowledge, while useful eventually from a higher perspective, is just seen as worthless at this very uncomfortable point. So the true, the beautiful, and the good, in terms of the larger perspectives, are being revealed, and the dark passages of worldly thought, which reveals so little, these are being infiltrated by the impressions of that which is really true. True at all times and all places, has to do with wisdom. That which is essentially beautiful, that which is fundamentally good, and not just relatively good, relatively beautiful, relatively true. When we leave the 18 lower subplanes, we are leaving the world of relativity. Well, not entirely, okay, but it's certainly a much more relative world than the world in which we are entering. We're approaching the archetypes, which in terms of our particular understanding is a world of stability and continuance created by divine purpose. So the dark passages of worldly thought are now open to a larger type of impression from the world of divine patterns on the cosmic ethers. The torch of light, by the way, the torch and the lotus, these are said to be two prominent symbols during the age of Aquarius. Well, these are fiery symbols. The torch of light, which really is the fire of real truth, and you can, with this fire, you can burn that which is ignorant and untrue. The torch of light and the fire of right. So a new type of morality is coming in. It's not just knowledge. It's the question of how knowledge is used and what knowledge is necessary at a given time in order for humanity to really advance along the right-hand path. The torch of light revealing what is true compared with what is ignorant and untrue. The fire of right revealing what is the proper way to go versus the improper, immoral way to go. They must burn at, or consume in some way, consume and make different, the garnered treasures of the past. Yes, there are treasures. All of these nuggets of knowledge are treasures, but they have to be submitted to the light of truth in order to be seen in the true perspective. The torch of light does this. And they have to be, the position which they occupy in the development of rightness in the human race must be revealed. Is humanity on the right path, or is it on the wrong path? What does all this knowledge accumulated, how does it aspect, how does it contribute to the treading of the right path, the moral path, the path leading to the good? So all of these accumulations have to be subjected to, which means burned, the greater light of the torch and the greater fire of rightness. And then they can be wisely used. They must burn the garnered treasures of the past. And so in their previous form, and as objects almost of idolatry, sort of worshiping one's accumulations, they are set aside, but they are seen to be useful in the greater light and in the vision of the right. We have some six-ray images here, I think, and maybe the six-ray is useful in this type of changing of the garnered treasures of the past. We're not talking about the necessity, we're not talking about the necessity of throwing them away, because everything can be used. Everything can be used. But what we are talking about is shining such a perspective upon them that they are seen in the right light, and they are seen in terms of the moral, spiritual development of humanity, and not just as isolated objects of interest because I'm interested in them. Well, why are you studying this? I'm interested in them. Why? I don't know. I'm just interested in them. No, there has to be a purpose behind it. These treasures have to be seen as useful in relation to a plan, and a higher light has to shine upon them, and a higher rightness has to guide them or use them in order for this to occur. All right. So this slow opening of the wisdom eye, it's all this is going to take place, especially between the first and third initiations. I was shocked when I read that. Usually we think about the third eye as something unfolding around the time of the third initiation and beyond. But there's a slow unfoldment from the time that the monad has contacted the soul on its own plane without the personality knowing that at the first initiation, at which time buddhi really begins to suffuse the system, and the true, the beautiful, and the good in that order, because that's how they can be approached. They can't be approached so much as the good, the beautiful, and the true. We have to work our way from truth towards the good, I do think. And then thought changes entirely. Well, you can measure this for yourself as you see how you think, you who have been studying these things for quite a while in various ways, and you compare what worldly thought is and how do you try to get across to worldly thought. How do you break up those thought forms, those misconnections, or connections which just don't exist? How do you help there be created the necessary connections which will be revelatory? You try in your own way to hold a light up to the worldly thought. You try to say, look, in terms of what must be done, this is the useful knowledge, the fire of right. So always, whatever a person holds dear in terms of their accumulations, we're trying to hold the torch and the fire to those things, in our own case and for others. The 7 ways of light. It's interesting, it really is the 7 rays. When you're studying the second ray, it's particularly the ray under which the study of the 7 rays occurs, just the way the study of astrology occurs under the 3rd ray particularly. And Master DK, I think, having a lot of 2nd and 3rd ray, blends these together. Excuse me. The 7 ways of light, or the 7 rays, must wean away the attention of the scholar. Well, it doesn't sound like nothing with the 2nd ray occurs drastically. First ray comes along, cuts it, done, go on. Just to keep a stiff upper lip and just move on and take the pain. First ray way, but I often say to people, how would you like your bandage ripped off your hairy arm? Would you like a nice, slow approach? Or would you like it just ripped and that's that? You know, how do you take the bandage off? So maybe you can tell which way the first ray would go and which way the second ray would go. So anyway, this is weaning. You know, when a baby is nursing, you say, okay, that's it. No more breast milk for you. Now here's the bottle. Maybe that's the first ray approach, but the weaning process is one of slow substitution and variation and skill and action and all that. Second ray method. The 7 ways of light, in other words, knowledge of these great 7 energies, which in a way condition, control, and structure all the thing in the lower worlds, captures the attention. You know, it's like learning that a prism gives off 7 energies. It's like learning the 7 major colors. It's like learning the 7 notes of the octave. There are higher order energies which organize the energies below. And from complexity, we move to simplicity. And this is something that the second ray can learn and must learn. Wean away the attention of the scholar. He gets a little bit bored with all that he has found and stored and used. It's all very good, but what meaning does it have? What purpose does it have? How does it fit in the larger scheme of things? These are the things that he begins to ask himself. And so he gradually turns his attention away from those things and begins to look up towards the higher organizing principles. Yes, they are useful now. They're being shown, their usefulness is being shown, but only in the higher light that is now streaming in from the soul. We can call that soul the thinker, we can call it the gardener, we can call it the higher scholar, whatever we want to call it, the knower. But light is coming in, and an understanding of the morality in which all of this knowledge can fit. I mean, suppose you know how to blow up the world. You know, there are scientific discoveries which had to be stopped. They are so dangerous. What's the good of knowledge for knowledge? Knowledge's sake, just knowing so that you can know it, compared with knowing for a higher plan or purpose. This is the state of mind that begins to take over the consciousness of the scholar. So it weans away the attention of the scholar from all that has been found and stored and used. And here comes the word repulses. He repulses all that detail. He repulses all that recollection. From it will come a harvest of memory and basic knowledge of the patterns of things. But he doesn't, at this moment, need to know all the details. All of that preoccupation with the detail in the lower world, he repulses in favor, well, perhaps a preoccupation with detail in the higher world. But at least he's entering the world of meaning. So there's a cut, a detachment, a turning away from, a disinterest in that which is from the lower world. And he's finding his way now, because he's approaching the first initiation and beyond, as his third eye begins to open up, into the Hall of Wisdom, because the Hall of Wisdom is pretty much the opening of the 3 sacrifice petals, which are touched by the rod of initiation and which represent the first, second, and third initiation, respectively, petals 7, 8, and 9 being touched by the rod. Of course, it's not all in utter sequential pattern that this happens, you know, and how that happens we will one day see. But let's just say that when Sanat Kumara touches the 7th petal, it greatly advances the process of the first initiation. It is, in effect, much work has been done, but it signifies, in a way, the first initiation. And the 5th petal is completely unfolded by that time. When he touches the 8th petal, the 6th petal is completely unfolded, and that signifies the second initiation, though much work has been done. And when he touches the 9th petal, then all the 9 petals are unfolded. How he does this, etc. Well, let's say it's the Christ for the first 2. I should have said that, 7th and 8th petal, and then Sanat Kumara for the 9th petal. So that's a correction. So this the scholar repulses, and he finds his way. Doesn't sound like it's an immediate entry into that Hall of Wisdom, which is the third of the 3 halls. It follows the Hall of Learning, and it is not underground. It's built upon a hill. And what's a hill? I would say that hill has a lot to do with the higher mental plane. It's not a mountain necessarily, but mountains, the real mountains, begin to occur on the cosmic ethers as far as I'm concerned. But with respect to the lower 18 subplanes, it's a hill. And it's a hill with soul perspective. And that hall of wisdom, which one enters at the time of the first initiation and stays there, is where the consciousness is now being focused with greater and greater rapport with the soul center on the higher mental plane, and not deep underground. And underground really signifies the lower 18 subplanes, and especially the lower 3 of the systemic subplanes, way, way down there. Once we begin to wake up to the soul potentials, we oftentimes, like Leadbeater and Besant, begin to study more objectively the subtle worlds, which are still underground, but we have the incentive to learn about them in the light of the soul. How do you get into the Hall of Wisdom? Well, only the opened eye can find this way. It's the eye of understanding. It's the eye of unity. It's the eye which reveals what the Son of Mind knows. It is the eye of the soul-illumined mind. And along with this comes the phenomenology of the pineal gland being re-stimulated and the ethers in the center of the head being activated and the light of the head becoming more brilliant. And so there are these phenomenal accompaniments to the opening of this unitive eye of understanding. And eventually, when we're really gaining access to the higher sections of the Hall of Wisdom, we might say, then the third eye is much more fully opened. At first, we're creeping our way into the Hall of Wisdom. It can last a long time, many lives. It can last a long time from the first initiation to the third, many lives. But all that time, the capacity for understanding from the perspective of the soul is growing. Things are looking more inclusive, more related, and our life on the earth is subject to plan and impelled by a purpose, even though we may not understand it. We each will have a life purpose, but we may not understand the deeper planetary purpose with which our life purpose is supposed to align. Well, okay, you know, there's so much more to say about this one. You know, I'm very tempted in secondary faction to just kind of dwell ponderously upon each one of these statements. But, you know, go through your own life and see how it may be working and see where you are and what have you repulsed and what are you learning now. I think that many of us lie beyond this point. I think we have repulsed strictly worldly knowledge. It has to be for a purpose. Well, you know, what's the meaning of it? Where does it fit? You know, is it right to be studying these things? How can it be applied to promote humanity upon the right path? In other words, it's not just knowledge, it's how is knowledge used. That's the fire of right, burning knowledge to make sure that it is applied and used correctly. So anyway, the 7 ways of light, the 7 rays, the big abstract organizing septinates, which we learn are organizing many, many factors in our world, begin to be very interesting. And on the second ray, we begin to study the 7 rays. And our attention turns upward. Our attention turns inward. And then for a while, we put away all those facts of the lower worlds, and we want to know what does wisdom say? We want to be wise about our living and to use all knowledge wisely and to proceed wisely in every way. And that we do as we progress through the first, through third initiation, and even afterwards. And even though we can use that which is deep underground, because the basic usefulness of it has been revealed, we are not preoccupied with it. We are preoccupied with meaning, with significance, with cause, with the larger picture. And in that context, all of our former interests can be used and applied. Meanwhile, as the eye of understanding and the synthesis opens up, we are making our way into the truly wise position of the one who can actually polarize himself within his causal body on the higher mental plane, and is not simply the soul-infused mind focused on the fourth subplane of the mental plane, but already can transfer his consciousness into the causal body. All right, well, that's what I got out of this. Old Commentary Perspectives, number 2. I'm always dissatisfied with what has been said. I like to go over and over a thing, just getting more and more meaning out of it, more and more associations out of it, more and more understanding of its real significance. But it is the wise use of slow action. All of this is a slow process. With the second ray, it is the wise use of slow action. And of course, we are moving from darkness to light, from the underground to the hill, and eventually to the mountain. We're moving from limited, rational, logical processes to sudden, illumined, intuitive processes. We're moving from the objectivity which sees everything as distinct and fragmentary using the two eyes, subject and object unrelated, to the unity of the third eye where subject and object are the same. This is the basic movement. As I say, it's not particularly along the love line of the second ray, but it has in it a lot of the wisdom line, which is under the first ray, and a lot of the line of the occultist, particularly, which is under the third ray. And we just have to have a deeper search, and search for a deeper type of knowledge than used to interest us and preoccupy us when we were just thinking that the only sphere of legitimate inquiry was the 18 lower subplanes, and especially the world of the senses. Okay, I think what we can do is we can have our great invocation at this point, and then move on to number 3. Maybe not tonight, maybe tomorrow. We'll get there. Yep, we're there. Okay. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Okay, friends, we'll be on to the third ray before long. And meanwhile, we'll probably say good evening for tonight. I'm somewhat limited by how fast these programs can be transformed into a usable format. Ties up the computer, and so forth. But the hour is late for me after a lot of sleeplessness. And we'll get on to the others, and then back to identification and back to astrology, and try to keep it all going in true third-ray fashion. Okay. So we'll see you then, and let's just say ponder on this. Ponder on this. Okay.